Hello, this is Sam Gerrans from Truth in the News. Today is Wednesday, the 20th of April, 2022, and I believe I've sorted out some of the technical issues which have been bedeviling this project since I began, so we'll see how that goes. Today I'm going to look at another article from The Independent. This is a little bit different. I have scanned it briefly, and you'll see it's not so much like overt propaganda. I mean, there is a propaganda quotient to it, but there are some facts in it as well, which make it even more interesting. So we'll jump in and have a look at that. So this is called "NATO Isn't Ready for War with Russia," warns UK General. Very occasionally they do have to tell you something that's true, especially when they've been lying to you for so long. The fact is that Russia is already fighting NATO. So really, this is missing context. But we won't worry about that so much. But the fact is that Russia is sort of being touted as fighting Ukraine, but it isn't. It's fighting NATO. And I would also say, and I've said this before, that in my view, what we're seeing in Ukraine is leftover business from World War II. It's the final battle of World War II. And in this battle, what we have is Russia fighting on the same side that it fought in World War II against the Nazis. And we have the world community, whatever they call themselves, the international community, fighting on the side of the Nazis. And as I've said before, and there isn't much for me to do on this channel except repeat myself, because I've only really got 8 items on the menu, and it is so banal and it does repeat, so I kind of am stuck with that. So I apologize, but it is what it is. That this is how I believe they're going to break the West's conception of itself as moral. Because the West has no moral backbone, it has no moral doctrine. It's just got gush, and the corollary to gush is outrage, gush and outrage. It doesn't have, there's no nuance because you can't afford it. There is no real catechism. There's nothing that everyone agrees upon except emotions. So how do you fight with that? Well, if you're capable of reason and you live in the West, you've discovered that it's very difficult to talk to anybody because you can't reason with emotions because they're on different ontological planes. If you've ever been on one of those, I'm sure everyone has, driving along, especially in big built-up centres, and suddenly there's a road actually going above you and you're driving underneath or above another road. It's more obvious if you're driving underneath it. These roads will never meet, not ever. It's not possible for them to because they're on different planes. Well, that's emotions vis-a-vis reason. So in this, the Western populations are governed by what I call, rather disparagingly, gush. But even with gush, you do sometimes have to present some sort of facts, and you have to prepare them for what's coming because gush needs to be managed. If you've ever had I have a 9-year-old daughter, so I know what I'm talking about. Here we are. Let's just jump into it and see how the gush quotient is being directed here. So, NATO isn't ready for war with Russia, warns UK General. And obviously this rather belies the fact that the West has always been basically at war with Russia and pushing for war with Russia. So at least the cat's out of the bag on that one. Can I move this somewhere? Hold on. No, maybe not. All right, let's just carry on. Russia is not ready for a war with Russia. Sorry, NATO is not ready for a war with Russia, a British general has warned. Alliance countries have supported Ukraine. Alliance countries. Where did that come from? Alliance countries. I suppose they can't really call themselves, well, they called themselves the Allies for a while, didn't they? But, I mean, alliance countries, well, there is an alliance. This use of language is very interesting. We're all together. Yes, and but actually not. When you this is really missing context. but it's a little bit more than that. It's kind of a lie as well. But we'll just leave it there. Most of the world is either indifferent or against the so-called alliance countries. I mean, depending on how you, maybe not in terms of GDP. Actually, no, probably in terms of GDP as well. Seeing as everyone, that's all anyone cares about. But certainly in terms of population, seeing as we all have to pretend that lots of opinions matter. If you're going to if you're going to subscribe to that conceit, well, then surely that should be important. But it's not important. What's important is the exceptionalism of a few countries which are told what to do by America, and America itself being told what to do by yet another group of people who shall remain unnamed at this point. Anyway, that's what's going on here. Alliance countries, whatever that alliance is we're talking about, have supported Ukraine with arms and financial aid since Russia's invasion. That's missing context, because if you don't know, I mean, look up John Mearsheimer. He'll tell you all about what the actual context is to that. But have been careful to avoid any actions that could draw them into the war. Yeah, this is, when you were at school, those little slimy, the kind, they sort of get a fight going and stand at the sidelines going, fight, 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 and get it all going. But they wouldn't jump in themselves. You know those types of people. Well, that's what the West has been doing. It's been walking a very fine line. Russia, I mean, can you imagine if it was the other way around? That America was engaged in one of its, endless wars in order to protect the interests of one particular country. And Russia was sending lots of weapons, and can you imagine what the response would be? Just for a moment. I mean, all I'm trying to say is that the double standard is, it's so obvious, and but that's all you've got, and that's why they need to manage you with emotions. Because if people ever stopped and reasoned this through, it would all be done. They only have emotions, and that's why the media is how it is. Has to be. There's no other way of doing it. So, General Sir Richard Barrons, head of Joint Forces Command from 2013 through 2016 now. So he's retired. Yes, he's retired, or at least he's not. He doesn't hold that post. Was asked in a hearing of the UK Parliamentary Defence Committee on Tuesday at what point NATO would be left with no option but to fight Russia. Yeah, at what point they're going to drag you into World War III, whilst you've just been through the COVID part of the business plan, and your economies are being collapsed. So anyway, they decided to ask him what his opinion was. I'm surprised they bothered. Because those evil Russians are out there doing their evil things. Anyway, let's just carry on with this. He said NATO, quote, will have a call to make. I have to make a decision. If Russian forces were able to reverse their fortunes and threaten larger parts of Ukraine than they are targeting in the new Eastern Offensive. I'm just going to unpack all of this because this is quite intense, Tosh. I mean, you have kind of Tosh, and then you've got kind of intense Tosh. This is intense Tosh. Firstly, reverse their fortunes. If you want to know about Russia's fortunes, you can find out. I mean, listen to Scott Ritter. He's very good. Is it the Dreisen report that I came across recently? This is a United States Marine. He has a very good blog. The chaps at the Duran recommend that. Check him out. See what he says about Russia's fortunes. So I'm not putting myself forward here as a military expert. That's not my position here. But clearly, the Russians are winning and have been pretty much from the beginning. The only reason it's taken as long as this is because Russia thought that they could, reach some sort of agreement with Ukraine, and they went in very soft, according to Scott Ritter. So, the idea reverse their fortunes. I think this guy, if anybody in NATO knows what the true state of affairs is on the ground, General Sir Richard Barrons does, because he's not a moron, because he actually has some training. Because he doesn't work for the media, he can see, he can read a map, and also he will understand certain things like strategy. I would imagine, and he will have studied, I would imagine, unless he's one of these sort of, one of these appointments where people have got no skills and talents anymore, which is, is quite standard in the West now. But he was 2013, 2016, so he must have come up, his career must have started in, I don't know, 1970, something like that. So he caught the period of time where people actually had to be able to do stuff and not just have, check the right identity boxes. So I guess he has a brain. Clearly, he's not planning on putting his weight behind anything. So he isn't contradicting the narrative. He's bright enough to realize that's not a good idea. So what he's saying is that if Russian forces were able to reverse their fortunes. That's not part of the quotes. That's inserted in here. Again, so this is all assumed conclusion, it's missing context, but it's also gaslighting, I think we can say. It's definitely that. I mean, you can play along. We are playing the world's most boring game, which is propaganda bingo. You can just make, kind of check off points that I miss as you go along if you decided to play. And threaten larger parts of Ukraine than they are targeting in the new Eastern Offensive. I mean, the new Eastern Offensive, this is real tosh as well, isn't it? The evil Russians.
Yes, comrade.
So, I mean, it's just ridiculous. It isn't a new offensive. It's actually one of the key points of why Russia's gone in there, which is to secure the Donbass region, which has been shelled for the last 8 years, with 14,000 Russian-speaking Ukrainians being killed just in that region. I mean, the Ukrainians kill people all over the place, all over the country. And nevertheless, the Russians are evil. The Russians. It just gets so... It is a cartoon. And what else have you got except cartoons and gush? But anyway, they're there. They're sorting it out. That's been the point. This is actual strategy. They're not just emoting and using hashtags and throwing hissy fits. They're getting the job done. Anyway, let's continue with this. And all that, this is a quote, and all that would be easier if we had made any preparations at all to act in those circumstances at the speed required, and we have not. That means no, you can't do anything. NATO's stuffed. I mean, why NATO would be wanting to fight Russia, I don't know. But that was... And remember, the Russians have been saying for years, certainly Putin's been saying since 2007, since the Munich speech, which Scott Ritter has a very high opinion of. I listened to it in Russian. It's an excellent speech. And I agree, it's one of the seminal speeches of the last 100 years. He's basically sitting there telling all these people, the game's over now. We're not going to play ball with you. And all Russia's ever asked for is something very reasonable. Don't put your nuclear missiles next to our borders. And don't try to provoke a war. That's it. That's all we want. And stop trying to undermine our economy with your NGOs and all the rest of it. We don't want a colour revolution in this country. That's it. What's so unreasonable about that? Anyway, let's carry on. Quote, the second aspect would be if whatever happens in Ukraine causes President Putin to escalate it for his own purposes into other parts of NATO, then it's a very much easier question because we'll be dealing with a breach of Article 5. Yeah, this is, if you attack one, you attack all sort of thing. Now, I mean, I can't speak for, what Putin's sort of big plan is, but I can certainly speak to what he's stated his plan is. And I can also, again, point you in the direction of people like Scott Ritter, who says, I mean, Russia doesn't have that kind of capability. I mean, to be perfectly honest, I don't think Russia really wants Ukraine. All it wants is what it said it wanted, what was agreed in the Minsk Accords. That's all it wants. Don't kill Russian citizens. Don't outlaw the Russian language. Stop oppressing people. Stop killing Russian speakers in the Donbass region. And don't join NATO because it threatens Russia existentially. These are all very reasonable requirements. Oh, and by the way, you're not getting Crimea, quote unquote, back, which belongs to Russia anyway. That's it. There's nothing unreasonable in any of this. Ukraine didn't have to be destroyed in the process. So anyway, all that to say, is Russia interested in the West? I don't think so. The West is collapsing anyway. Russia's got enough problems without having to sort of deal with whatever it is, X 100 million hissy fit throwing, 13-year-old girls. We've got enough problems in this country. We don't need those kind of problems. I mean, to be perfectly honest, I can't speak for all Russians, but my general sense of it, certainly in the kind of Telegram channels that I follow, and there are a couple of really excellent Russian analysts. They're very ironical about Europe and the West. Just transgender, non-binary, confused weirdos. Who wants that? We don't want it in our country. You can keep all of that sick stuff. It's not for us. So I don't think, I don't know, but is my impression, as somebody who lives here and speaks language, etc., that Russia is sort of chomping at the bit to kind of invade Europe? I don't think so. Europe seems to me like it doesn't need any external enemies. I mean, who could possibly do a worse job for Europe than Europe's been doing for itself? I find it hard to imagine. I mean, maybe I'm wrong. We'll see. My overall concern in answering that question is the main reason we are keen to avoid a war between Russia and NATO is that NATO isn't ready, and we should be ashamed of that. I don't really agree with that. No, I think you should be ashamed of the fact that you're really pushing for any kind of war between NATO and Russia. I thought NATO was supposed to be a defense pact. That was supposed to be its remit. Why you should be ashamed of the fact that your defense alliance isn't able to attack another country at the drop of a hat. Why that should be a cause for shame, I don't know. But I do get the point that he's making. What he's trying to say is, look, guys, we can't back this up. All we've got is put it into business terms. All we have is a marketing department. We don't have any product. You remember how Russia was failing miserably and now NATO can't beat it? Isn't that surprising? While everyone was, your whole channels with hundreds of thousands of subscribers, millions of subscribers will tell you all day long how the Russians are failing, how the Russian plan, which they all seem to know what it is failing miserably. And now we have somebody who actually knows what war is supposed to look like, or at least let's assume he does if he isn't some sort of transitioned woman, which I think he must be too old to fall into that kind of period. This period of the next generation insanity. So he's telling you we can't beat the Russians. When did that happen? You see, this is how propaganda works. You see, they've been telling you for so long that Russians can't fight and haven't got anything, and the morale is really bad. I thought morale was really bad. I thought we were bogged down, yes, and had been sort of beaten out of Kiev by Instagram thoughts wearing lip gloss, taking selfies with an AK-47. No, even NATO can't beat that now. Oh dear. At NATO's Madrid summit, the priority should be, quote, to reset the balance of power with Russia, end quote, in terms of military capability, so that Moscow, quote, no longer thinks it can set the terms of debate with NATO, he said. Yeah, what he means is we've got to build an army and train it, because we've been talking big for so long and fighting a proxy war. We're already fighting. I mean, NATO is already fighting a proxy war with Russia and losing. And this guy knows it. If anybody knows it, he does. Again, I'm not a military expert, but according to Scott Ritter, who I consider is, he says it takes about 10 years to build up a proper army. It's not just a money problem. I mean, in the West, people are really attached to the proposition that everything happens like that. I guess it's partly because people are trained in that. The message is the medium, or the medium is the message. Rather, with the internet, we just want something, it just download it. There you are. Here was the solution. This is the download. 10 divisions of tanks. There you are. The Matrix. I know kung fu. No, it doesn't work like that. The real world doesn't work like that. It's not even a matter of just guns and tanks and killing stuff. You have to train people. It's like building a football team. You couldn't just put a football team together in 5 minutes. Even if they're good players individually, they have to learn to play together. There's a whole way of doing it. So this is how it works. It takes 10 years apparently. So Russia can do a lot in 10 years also. Especially now, it really knows how its stuff works together. These are combined armored divisions working together. Anyway, let's just carry on with this. As much as building up forces will be important, it is vital that those forces and military equipment are deployed to the right areas of NATO, he said. Well, I think he's pushing for future business, isn't he? I mean, at what point will the West just admit that I suppose that's what they're trying to do now. Russia is now, de facto the enemy. But if you have a brain and you can remember, all Russia ever wanted was a set of things which are very, very reasonable. But again, I go back to my thing about breaking the psyche of the West. I think that's what's really going on here. I think it's about teaching the West that they are the new Nazis, and that's the only way. It's the only way that you can get a gush generation to recognize that it's anyway in the wrong, because they have no moral line, no moral doctrine. They're either outraged or gushing, because it's all about feelings. They don't have a catechism. There is no sets. There are no rules. There are no commandments. When it's all just solipsism, do what thou wilt. Well, how do you argue with that? I can want all kinds of stuff, but the West doesn't say I'm just a selfish, solipsistic child. If they did that, then they would have some sort of level of honesty. But that is really basically the truth. But they do have these sets of kind of gushy stuff attached to, previous incarnations of propaganda that they were fed. So, at the level of propaganda gush, they still, Nazis are sort of bad. So I guess it's going to take this much for them to realize perhaps we are evil after all. I mean, what does it take? Because clearly Iraq wasn't enough, and Syria wasn't enough, and Madeleine Albright's open sort of support for murdering 500,000 Iraqi children, that wasn't enough. I mean, what does it take? I think maybe this is enough, but not just this. Obviously, I think that the West could swallow being exposed as Nazis, but I think it's going to be very hard to swallow that on a background of a total economic collapse and nothing to eat and no electricity and being cold. Very, very, very interesting thing about Pavlov. As he's known, Academic Pavlov in Russia, Pavlov's dog and all of that. And obviously people know that he wasn't so interested in dogs. He was interested in people and the salivating dog by ringing the bell. But there's more to it than that. What I found, what I read or came across was that what they discovered was that you can shock dogs twice. Like you can do two bad things to them. For example, let's say they're hungry. Okay, that's a stress. So hungry, and then say loud noise, really disturbing, sirens going off. Two stresses. The dog can handle just about two stresses. But when you add the third stress, for example, an electric shock every 12 seconds, or whatever it is, then they give up. They just lie down and give up. So I think that clearly the purpose of this investigation was how to control people, populations, and so on. People say to me, yes, well, the West is never going to admit this and blah, blah, blah. I'm sure you're right. If everything else stays the same, I would agree with you, because solipsism needs a full stomach to operate. What happens when you're hungry? I mean, not just hungry, what people think there's a word now, is it hangry? It's a kind of fusion of hungry and angry. what that is really is that food is just basically weaponized and you're just having withdrawals. That's what that is. I'm not talking about that. I'm not talking about irritations because you can't quite get exactly what you want exactly when you want it. I'm talking about actual hunger, actual problems. See, in Russia, I'm not here to sell you Russia or anything, but I will say about Russia and the Russians respond very well to real problems, and it's a good thing because we have a lot of them. And but in the West, you've only if you were born after the Second World War, which is pretty much everyone, you never really had a problem, like a real problem, except COVID, which was a kind of a beta test. I think that was the emotional carpet bombing, softening up the emotional infrastructure of the psyche in order to send in the tanks. And I think that now we're in that stage. So anyway, enough of all this. Let's just continue. So yes, you don't have any way of fighting the Russians. He also said, I don't think many people in the UK have given any thought to anything. No, he didn't say that. He said, I don't think many people in the UK have given any thought to the consequences of Russian cruise missiles arriving in London. They exist, and we simply don't have the means to deal with them in anything above tiny numbers. Okay, so basically you're completely vulnerable to a Russian attack on London, should the Russians want to do that. Again, I don't for a moment believe that that's what Russia wants. Russia just wants... What Russia wants, I think, is just to stop having this libtard agenda rammed down its throat. We don't want men who don't know that they're men and walking up and down the street in high-heeled shoes, complaining because you used the wrong pronoun and all of that. The Russians, I don't believe, they want their culture and their country turned into the kind of cultural wastelands this kind of strip malls and all the rest of it that's happened in America and in the UK with the confusion of nations. Obviously, I'm telling you as I see it. I'm telling it to you as I see it. I don't believe Russia wants that, and I think that's why the West really hates Russia, because Russia won't get with the green hair insanity program. It still has these conceits like the Orthodox Church and actual history, or at least its presentation of history. It doesn't see its own culture and its own past in relative terms, and it's not prepared to do that, certainly not under Putin. And I think my sense of it is that most Russians agree with that. I'm not a member of the Russian Orthodox Church, but I totally agree with it. I don't want my child growing up around children who don't know that whether they're male or female, and all of that, because this is a new form of power. This is, it's quite clearly going towards, they're basically pushing paedophilia in the West, aren't they? I mean, we lived in UK quite recently, a few years ago. What was it? I suppose 5 years ago, something like that. And in the nursery, our daughter went to a nursery. I mean, it was scary, quite frankly. When we started going to that nursery, there were a couple of women who worked there, and they were great. And within about 3 months, one of them went onto maternity leave and never came back, and the other one disappeared. They were replaced by these very Soviet kind of women. I mean, they were scary. They rang me up one day to basically tell me to come into the nursery, and they were going to educate me on how we should be feeding our daughter. We were giving our daughter fruit and vegetables, but they knew better, and they were going to tell me how to do it. And basically, that was the reason we left the UK. I was afraid that and this happens a lot. Look it up. You'll find that it happens, especially with Russians, especially if one of the parents is Russian. They do this a lot in the West. The UK is not the worst. I think that some of the Scandinavian countries are absolutely infamous in this, and that literally they'll just come take your child away. That's why we left the country. I told nobody. I didn't tell the nursery, didn't tell anyone. Not until we'd already left. Anyway, going back to this nursery, I think that they're kind of keeping an eye on you to see how you respond. And in this nursery, they had, I think this book was called "Me and My Two Daddies" or something like this, and I reacted to this, and they were watching me. You could feel it. You could feel it. So I mean, we packed our bags and got out, and I didn't say anything to the nursery till after we were safely out of the country. This is what you're living under. I'm not saying everyone has this experience, but I didn't need to hang around to see where this was going. I understand Soviet history. I know what in Russian it's called stukachество. It's the sort of snitch system. I know how that all works. All right, little technical issue there. Let's just finish up with this article. And if Britain was required to defend another NATO country from Russia, the example given was Estonia, its forces would be destroyed in about a week by Russia's air force, he said. I thought I can't. I'm not cheering for Team Russia exactly. Although I have to say, when you're right, you're right. You know what I mean? You just know when you're right. And it's not that I'm right. It's quite strange for me because I've grown up. I'm 54 years old. I've seen all of these American bring a bottle wars over the years, and I've been totally sickened by every single one of them. It's very strange to be in a position where the government of the country that you live in, you have to say they're right. I mean, of course, war is bad. I accept that, but bad things occasionally have to happen, and in this case, Russia is completely correct on every single count. It's just right. When you're right. But if you remember, the West was being told just a couple of weeks ago. In fact, it's still being told in various places. In fact, it's being told in this article that Russia is still failing. Hold on. Look at the contradictions here. Just going back. Where has it gone? Blah, blah. Blah, blah. Hold on. We were told a little while ago, yes, if Russian forces were able to reverse their fortunes. You see how it works? At the same time, this is telling you that Russia's losing, but at the same time, it's also winning. In fact, it's not only losing now, because if it was able to reverse its fortunes, it means those fortunes are currently not very, less than optimal. At the same time, if Britain was required to defend another NATO country, from Russia, its forces would be destroyed in about a week by Russia's air force. This is 1984. The ability to hold two mutually exclusive thoughts in the mind at the same time. War is peace. It's can't you see what you're living through? But I have to say, in one of my previous videos, I described 1984 and assumed that people would understand that they should read that, and then I mentioned Brave New World, and lots of sort of people have jumped in and said, "Oh no, it's not Brave New World, it's 1984." Yeah, I know. I just assumed that people would understand that. I think people should read both 1984 and Brave New World, because we're really living through it. It's like a symbiosis of both. But it's got other elements to it as well. There was a chap called Zamyatin who wrote a book called Мы, or We, which Brave New World was in some ways influenced by. It was a Russian book. Anyway. Britain laid out plans. Sorry about this. This is a new system, so I'm not quite sure. Yeah, I think that's right. Britain laid out plans to update its armed forces in the Integrated Security Review. Surprised they haven't turned that into an acronym. The ISR last year. These included surpassing the NATO commitment to spend 2% of GDP on defence annually. All right, you're starving to death, but it's okay. You can spend some more money on guns. Lifting the cap on the UK's nuclear weapons arsenal and creating a national cyber force to defend against hackers. I'd like to know what that actually means, lifting the cap on the UK's nuclear weapons arsenal. Just on the matter of nuclear weapons, people kind of pushing this idea, and Putin's going to nuke everybody and all the rest of it. This is ridiculous. If you know what the Russian nuclear doctrine is, it's nothing like that. Whereas the West's nuclear doctrine, NATO's, is first strike. That's not Russia's. Russia's only respond. Who are the good guys here, for goodness sake? Anyway, let's just finish this up. We're nearly done. Jen Barons said the plans are insufficient to deal with the security situation Britain faces in the coming years. He warned tensions with Russia could continue throughout the century. Yeah, well, thanks to whom? He suggested Britain follow Germany's lead with a short-term boost to defence spending. He's a retired general. Sorry. There's a chap, I can't remember his name. I expect somebody will tell me in the comments. He goes on CNN or whatever, Fox. No, CNN, I think what it is. I mean, this guy, he should just have Raytheon and, whatever it is, Lockheed Martin badges all over him. I mean, this guy just so clearly working for all of these companies. Anyway, I can't say that's the same is true for this chap. I don't know, but it does rather look that way. Yes, he suggested Britain follow Germany's lead with a short-term boost to defence spending. Days after Russia invaded Ukraine, Germany announced 100 billion for a new military fund. Well, that makes it sound like it's all solved then, doesn't it? 100 million, 100 billion, whatever it is, that's all done, sorted. Yeah, but you have to fight. And I mean, I don't mean to be kind of routinely nasty about what's the West and so on, but I mean, look at your armies as well now. These aren't the kind of boys who were joining the army in the 1970s, the 1980s even. These are people who think they're having, that they're oppressed if you don't use the right pronoun. And, let's not forget that you're going to have, all these go-girl type of people in the army now and all of the nonsense that goes along with that. That's absolutely terrible for morale, by the way. Men don't want women. Men go to war to get away from women. They don't want to take them with them. It's just ridiculous. I mean, there are women performing, important functions in Ukraine and so on, but they're not fighting. They're not in tanks. Men don't want that. I mean, I suppose I get attacked for being an ist, an it or no. But I mean, apart from that, have you got anything? I'm just saying that the men don't generally want this. And if you try to explain 50 years ago that this would be happening, although you could argue, I mean, women have fought in militaries before. Actually, to be fair, in the Russian army, it's the word divisions. So to some extent, I guess you could argue that, just to kind of wrong foot myself slightly. But what they didn't have was they were actual divisions. They were actual, units that were, and you still get that. If women want to fight, okay, that's different. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about this, everybody mixed into one thing, just to be clear. Anyway, last sentence. The government should consider raising military spending up to 3% for the next 5 years to revitalise the UK armed forces. Now, he is, to be fair, he is not saying that Russia could absolutely hand NATO's head to it on a plate, but he's saying Britain is underprepared, i.e. not prepared at all. So that seems to be more what he's saying there. But Russia's already defeating NATO. It's already doing it. It's doing it on the ground. And according to Alexander, I can't remember his surname, I do apologise, from the Duran, Britain only has around 20,000 men under arms. If you look at Wikipedia, it says 80,000, but he says no, that these are the actual fighting men. Russia has been fighting the Ukrainian army, which has got 250,000 full-time soldiers. That's more than 10 times the size of the UK army. It's winning. So anyway, just to put that in some perspective. Anyway, the reason why I wanted to look at this is because it is a form of propaganda, but it's what I call ground bait. It's getting and it's trying to kind of prepare people for reverse that's coming, because they have to prepare the plebs for what's coming. And what's coming is, oops, Russia is a credible threat. It is has a credible army. It's bogged down, but it's winning. It's a gas station with nuclear weapons, but it can still beat us. You see how it works? Anyway, I think it's enough of all of that. I'm going to drop this one now. And yeah, that's all for now.